Captain Elias Grant made one critical error, leading 27 men into Antarctica's Weddell Sea in 1916. He believed the Resolute could survive the ice. Crushing pressure destroyed their ship, stranding them on a disintegrating ice floe 900 miles from civilization. With 3 lifeboats, limited supplies, and no rescue coming, Grant faced an impossible choice: wait and die, or attempt a crossing that killed every crew before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The smell of coal smoke and seal blubber hung thick in the cramped cabin of the Resolute as Captain Elias Grant studied the ice charts spread across his navigation table. December 5, 1916. South Georgia Island's whaling station sat 2 miles behind them, its buildings already shrinking against the gray horizon. Grant pressed his thumb against their planned route, a red line cutting through the Weddell Sea toward the Antarctic coast. 900 miles of the most dangerous waters on Earth. Station manager thinks we're mad. First Officer Thomas Crean stood in the doorway, his thick Irish accent carrying over the rumble of the ship's engines. Said the ice reports are worse than he's seen in 20 years. Grant looked up. Crean was built like a draft horse, all shoulders and stubborn endurance. They'd served together on 2 previous expeditions, including the near disaster of 1912, when their ship had barely escaped the pack ice before being crushed. Hansen always thinks everyone's mad. That's why he runs a whaling station instead of exploring. Maybe he's smarter than us then. Crean moved to the table, tracing the route with one scarred finger. This passage here, between these ice fields, it's narrow. If it closes up while we're in it, it won't. Grant said it with confidence he didn't entirely feel. The letter from his wife sat folded in his breast pocket, pressed against his chest. Come home safe, Elias. The boys need their father. He touched the pocket briefly, then focused back on the charts. We've got 6 months of provisions. The Resolute has a reinforced bow. Norwegian built, same yard that built Fram. If any ship can handle the ice, it's this one. Crean nodded slowly, but his eyes held doubt. And the crew. Half of them have never seen pack ice before. Grant had handpicked 27 men for this expedition. 12 were experienced sailors who'd worked Antarctic waters. 8 were scientists, geologists, biologists, meteorologists eager to study the continent. The remaining 7 were young volunteers, most barely 20 years old, drawn by adventure and the promise of making history. James Harper, the youngest at 19, had lied about his age to get aboard. The green ones will learn fast enough, Grant said, and we've got good men to teach them. You, Worsley, McNeish, that's more polar experience than most expeditions ever have. Through the porthole, Grant watched the last of South Georgia disappear into the mist. The open ocean stretched ahead, dark water turning white with foam as the ship's bow cut through the swells. In 72 hours, they'd reached the edge of the pack ice. After that, navigation became a chess match against an opponent that could crush wooden ships like eggshells. Grant rolled up the charts and secured them with leather straps. Get the men together. I want everyone clear on what we're heading into. No surprises, no illusions. They need to know the ice doesn't care about courage or preparation. Honesty before we're committed, Crean said. I like it. Honesty because once we enter that ice, there's no turning back. Grant pulled on his heavy coat and headed for the deck. The Antarctic wind hit his face like a slap, cold and sharp with the promise of what waited ahead. 27 men trusted him to bring them home. He'd made that promise to each one when they signed on. He intended to keep it. 13 days later, the Resolute pushed through the first scattered fields of pack ice like a boxer testing an opponent's guard. Navigator Frank Worsley stood beside Grant on the bridge, both men scanning the white maze ahead through binoculars. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Every breath came out as frozen vapor that clung to their beards as ice crystals. There! Worsley pointed to a dark channel snaking between 2 massive ice floes. Lead runs northeast for maybe 3 miles. After that, can't tell. Grant studied the passage. Leads were temporary highways through the pack ice. channels of open water that could close without warning when wind or current shifted the flows. Navigate them correctly and you save days of travel. Get trapped in one and the ice could crush your ship before you realize the danger. Take it, Grant said, but slow. I want men on deck watching both sides. The engine's pitch dropped as Worsley relayed orders to the engine room. The Resolute's speed fell from 6 knots to barely 3. On deck, crew members took positions along the rails, watching the ice slide past. The ship's hull groaned as small chunks scraped along the reinforced bow. Not dangerous yet, just the ice announcing its presence. Grant moved to the starboard rail where young James Harper stood gripping the wooden barrier with both hands. The kid's eyes were wide, fixed on an iceberg drifting past like a floating cathedral. It rose 40 feet above the waterline, which meant 200 feet of ice lurked beneath the surface. First time seeing the big ones up close, Grant asked. James jumped slightly, not having heard the captain approach. Yes, sir. I've seen pictures, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. It's bigger than any building back home. And that's just the small ones. Grant pointed ahead where larger bergs dotted the horizon, some the size of city blocks. The ice down here doesn't follow rules. It moves when it wants, goes where it wants. Respect it, but don't fear it. Fear makes you hesitate, and hesitation kills. How do you know when to push forward and when to wait? Grant considered the question. It was a good one, better than most green sailors asked. Experience, mostly. Reading the signs. Ice has a sound when it's stable versus when it's shifting. The color tells you if it's fresh or rotting. Wind direction matters. Current matters more. He gestured at the lead they were following. This channel. It's been here for days, maybe weeks. The edges are smooth, rounded. Fresh breaks look different. Sharp, jagged, bright white. The ship shuddered suddenly. Both men grabbed the rail as the Resolute lurched to port. From below came shouting and the sound of something heavy sliding across the deck. All stop! Worsley's voice rang out from the bridge. The engine cut. In the sudden quiet, Grant heard it. A deep, grinding sound, like millstones turning. He ran to the port side and looked down. A submerged chunk of ice, invisible beneath the dark water, had scraped the entire length of their hull. The Resolute had ridden up and over it, but the ship now sat at a 5-degree list. Grant's chest tightened. 5 degrees wasn't catastrophic, but it meant damage. He caught Crean's eye across the deck. Get McNeish. I want the carpenter checking every seam in that hull. Now. The ice had drawn first blood. 24 hours later, Grant stood in the hole watching Henry McNeish work by lantern light. The carpenter was 56 years old, gray-bearded and cantankerous, but his hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. He pressed his palm against a seam in the hull where water had seeped through, forming a thin sheet of ice on the interior planking. Crack the outer sheathing here and here. McNeish pointed to 2 spots along a 12-foot section. The ice gouged it good, not through to the main hull yet, but close. Another hit like that and we'll be taking on serious water. Grant crouched beside him, running his own hand along the damage. The wood felt solid enough, but he could see where the pressure had stressed the joints. Can you reinforce it? I can brace it from inside. But Captain, McNeish looked up, his eyes hard in the lantern light. This ship was built for ice, but she's not invincible. Every time we push through heavy pack, we're gambling. The odds catch up eventually. How long to make the repairs? 6 hours if the ice stays calm, 12 if we're taking hits while I work. Grant climbed back up the ladder to the deck. The Resolute hadn't moved since yesterday. They sat locked in place, surrounded by ice that had closed the lead behind them like a door slamming shut. The pack had thickened overnight, floes grinding together under pressure from currents Grant couldn't see or predict. Worsley estimated they drifted 3 miles south, the wrong direction. The crew had adapted to the stillness with the resignation of men who understood their fate wasn't in their hands anymore. Some played cards in the cramped forecastle. Others read by candlelight or wrote letters home that might never be mailed. Dr. Alexander Macklin, the expedition's physician, had organized an inventory of medical supplies, though everyone knew what happened to men caught in the pack ice. Medicine couldn't fix crushed ships or starvation. Grant found Worsley on the bridge, bent over his charts with a compass and protractor. McNish needs 6 hours, Grant said. Can the ice give us that? Worsley straightened, rubbing his eyes. He'd been awake for 30 hours straight, taking position readings whenever clouds broke enough to see stars. Look at this. He pointed to a series of pencil marks showing their drift pattern. We're moving in a spiral. The current's got us and it's pulling us southwest deeper into the pack. At this rate, we'll be 50 miles off course in a week. Will the ice open up? Eventually, maybe days, maybe weeks. Antarctic pack is unpredictable this time of year. Worsley tapped the chart. But here's the real problem. Even if we get free, we're already past the point where we can retreat back to South Georgia before winter sets in. We're committed now. Forward is the only option. Grant had known this moment was coming, the point where retreat became impossible. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it settle into your bones were different things. Behind them, escape routes closed. Ahead, the pack ice stretched for hundreds of miles, a frozen maze that killed ships regularly. Then we go forward, Grant said. Soon as McNish finishes repairs, we find another lead and push deeper. If we're committed, we don't waste time second-guessing. Worsley nodded, but his expression stayed grim. Through the porthole, they both watched the ice. It never stopped moving, shifting, groaning, rearranging itself according to forces neither man could control. The Resolute sat at its mercy now, a wooden ship in an ocean of ice that was slowly, methodically, tightening its grip. 3 weeks into January 1917, Grant woke to a sound that turned his blood cold. The grinding had started during the night watch, low and distant like thunder on the horizon. Now it surrounded the ship, a bass rumble that vibrated through the hull and into his bunk. He rolled out of bed, already pulling on layers of wool and canvas. The temperature inside his cabin hovered just above freezing. Outside, it was 40 below. On deck, the scene looked like a battlefield frozen in mid-action. Pressure ridges had formed overnight where ice floes collided and buckled upward. Some rose 20 feet high, jagged walls of broken ice that glowed pale blue in the Antarctic twilight. The Resolute sat pinned between two massive floes, her hull groaning as thousands of tons of ice pressed against both sides. Crean stood amidships with a team of men using long poles to measure the pressure. "She's holding," he called out when he saw Grant. "But it's building. You can hear it." Grant could. The grinding never stopped now. It came in waves as the ice shifted, relaxed, then compressed again. The Resolute's reinforced hull was designed for this, built with extra planking and internal bracing specifically to withstand ice pressure. But design and reality were different things when you were actually trapped in the vise. "How long has it been building?" Grant asked. "Started around 3 this morning, getting worse every hour." Crean pointed to a section of rail where the pressure had pushed the ship up at a 10-degree angle. "We're riding up on the ice now, not sitting in it. That's bad. Means when it really squeezes, we've got no give. We'll either pop up and out or..." He didn't finish. They both knew the alternative. Grant walked the length of the deck, checking stress points. Near the bow, he found young James and 2 other crew members watching a crack spread across the ice 10 feet from the hull. The crack widened as they stood there, opening from a hairline to a 3-inch gap in seconds. Water welled up through it, black and threatening. "Is that good or bad, Captain?" James asked. His voice stayed steady, but his knuckles were white on the rail. "Good if it relieves pressure, bad if it's the start of the ice breaking up beneath us." Grant watched the crack extend toward the stern. "Right now, we need the ice to stay solid enough to support our weight, but not so solid it crushes us. It's a narrow margin." The ship lurched suddenly. Everyone grabbed for handholds as the Resolute tilted another 5 degrees. From below came a sharp crack like a rifle shot, timber giving way under stress. Then another crack, then 3 more in rapid succession. Grant ran for the companionway. "McNish, get below and assess damage." He caught Worsley emerging from the navigation room. "I need to know if we're taking on water and how fast." Worsley disappeared down the ladder. Grant stayed on deck, watching the ice close in. The pressure ridges were still building, still grinding toward the ship. In his 3 previous expeditions to Antarctica, he'd seen ice crush 2 ships and nearly take a third. It happened fast when it happened. The ice would squeeze until something gave. usually the hull. Then the ship would flood and sink in minutes, taking down anyone who didn't get clear. He thought of his wife's letter. Come home safe. The boys need their father. The ice didn't care about promises. Worsley emerged from below deck 15 minutes later, his face grim. Forward hold is taking water, slow seepage through the starboard seams. McNeish says the pressure cracked 3 ribs and sprung 2 planks. He's bracing what he can, but if it gets worse, how long before we're in real trouble? Grant cut him off. He needed facts, not speculation. At current rate, 24 hours before the hold floods enough to affect our draft. But Captain, if the pressure increases, those cracks will widen. Could go from seepage to flooding in minutes. Grant did the math in his head. They were sitting 400 miles from the nearest land, trapped in ice that was actively trying to destroy their ship. Even if they abandoned the Resolute right now, they had 3 lifeboats designed for short coastal runs, not multi-hundred-mile ocean crossings through pack ice. And the Antarctic winter was closing in. Temperatures would drop to 70 below in the coming months, with storms that could flip boats like toys. Get the crew together, Grant said. Everyone. I don't care if they're sleeping. 5 minutes, main deck. The 27 men assembled in the freezing wind, their breath creating a fog bank around them. Grant stood on the elevated poop deck so everyone could see him. No point in sugarcoating what they all already knew. The ice is crushing us, he said flatly. The hull's compromised. We're taking on water. McNeish is doing everything he can, but the pressure keeps building. He paused, letting that sink in. Here's what we're going to do. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I want emergency supplies staged near all 3 lifeboats. Food, water, medical gear, navigation equipment, survival gear. If we have to abandon ship, we'll have minutes, not hours. Someone in the back, Grant thought it was one of the younger scientists, raised his hand. How will we survive in lifeboats? We're 400 miles from anything. We won't survive in a sinking ship either, Grant said. The boats are better odds than drowning in the hold. He swept his gaze across the assembled faces. Some looked terrified. Others looked resigned. A few, like Crean and Worsley, looked focused and ready. I want every man to pack a personal bag. 1 bag. Warmest clothes, any personal items that fit. Nothing heavy. Keep it by your bunk. If I give the order to abandon ship, you grab that bag and nothing else. Understood. Murmured acknowledgments rippled through the group. One more thing, Grant continued. We stay calm. Panic kills faster than cold or hunger. We've got experienced men, good equipment, and options, but only if we keep our heads. He looked at James, who stood near the front with wide eyes. Every one of you was chosen for this expedition because I believed you could handle the worst Antarctica could throw at us. Time to prove me right. The crew dispersed to their tasks. Grant descended from the poop deck and found McNeish waiting, tools in hand. Honest assessment, Grant said quietly. Can you save her? McNeish looked at the ship, his ship really, since he'd been maintaining her for 8 months. I can patch what's broken, but I can't stop the ice from breaking more. Every hour that pressure builds, we're rolling dice. Eventually our luck runs out. How long? Days, maybe a week if we're lucky, but Captain, McNeish's voice dropped lower. Start thinking about those lifeboats, because we're going to need them. 4 days later, at 3 in the afternoon, the Resolute died. Grant was in his cabin reviewing supply manifests when the ship lurched violently to starboard. The sound that followed was like nothing he'd ever heard, a massive splintering crack that seemed to come from the ship's very bones. He dropped the papers and ran. On deck, chaos. The main mast tilted at a 30-degree angle, its stays snapped and whipping in the wind. The deck itself had buckled amidships, planks heaving upward like a broken spine. Through the gap, Grant could see directly into the forward hold, where seawater was pouring in through a hull breach the size of a man's torso. Abandoned ship. Grant's voice cut through the confusion. All hands abandoned ship. This is not a drill. The crew moved fast, drilled movements taking over where panic might have frozen them. Men grabbed their personal bags and ran for the lifeboats. Crean and Worsley directed teams to the emergency supply caches they'd staged 4 days ago. Grant watched the coordinated evacuation with grim satisfaction. Preparation was the only thing standing between order and disaster right now. "Captain," McNeish appeared from below, soaking wet and bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "The keel's broken. She's splitting in two. We've got maybe 10 minutes before she goes under." Grant grabbed his personal bag from his cabin, clothes, his wife's letters, navigation charts, and the ship's log. Everything else could burn. He took one last look at the space where he'd lived for 8 months. The charts on the walls, the sextant on his desk, the photograph of his wife and sons tucked into the mirror frame. No time. On deck, the 3 lifeboats were being loaded with frantic efficiency. The James Caird, the largest at 22 feet, was taking most of the food supplies and navigation equipment. The Dudley Docker and Stancomb Wills, both smaller, were being packed with tents, medical supplies, and extra clothing. Men worked in teams, forming human chains to pass supplies from the stage caches to the boats. The Resolute tilted further. Water was rushing into the hold now, flooding faster than Grant had thought possible. The ship's bow rose as the stern sank, creating a slope that made footing treacherous. One of the scientists, Morrison the geologist, slipped and went sliding toward the rail. Crean caught him with one massive hand, hauling him back to safety. "Last boat," Grant shouted. "Anyone not in a boat in 60 seconds stays on the ice." He did a rapid head count as men climbed over the rails onto the ice floe beside the dying ship. 23, 24, 25. Where were the other 2? His heart hammered as he scanned the deck. James appeared from the companionway, carrying the ship's cat, Mrs. Chippy, tucked inside his coat. Behind him came Dr. Macklin with a final crate of medical supplies. "Move!" Grant pushed them toward the rail. "Now!" The 3 men scrambled down onto the ice. Behind them, the Resolute gave a grinding moan that sounded almost human. The deck split completely, the 2 halves of the ship pulling apart like a wishbone breaking. Masts crashed into the water, rigging tangled and snapped. The bow rose higher, pointing at the pale sky like a monument to their failure. Grant stood on the ice watching his ship die. 27 men, 3 lifeboats, emergency supplies that might last 2 months if they were careful, and 900 miles of frozen hell between them and salvation. The Resolute's stern slipped beneath the ice with a final gurgle. Then the bow. Then nothing remained but broken timbers and floating debris. "Right," Grant said, turning to face his crew. "We marched north, son." This story takes time to craft. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They made 300 yards the first day. 300 yards of brutal physical labor hauling boats that weighed over 1,000 pounds each across pressure ridges like broken staircases of ice. The crew worked in teams of 9, 3 teams rotating between boats. They'd fashioned harnesses from rope, looping them over shoulders and chests. When Grant gave the signal, all 9 men would lean forward and pull. Sometimes the boat moved a few feet. Sometimes it wouldn't move at all. The pressure ridges were the real enemy. Fields of broken ice thrust upward by grinding forces. They created barriers 10 to 20 feet high. The crew would reach a ridge and have no choice but to go over it. That meant unloading the boat, carrying supplies to the top, hauling the empty boat up using block and tackle, reloading on the other side, then repeating for the next 2 boats. By noon, every man's hands were bleeding through their gloves. The rope had worn through wool and canvas, cutting into palms and fingers. Dr. Macklin made his rounds during rest, applying salve and bandages, but everyone knew the wounds would reopen when they started pulling again. Grant stood on a pressure ridge looking back at where the Resolute had gone down. They'd traveled maybe a quarter mile. At this rate, it would take them 3 years to reach land. Worsley climbed up beside him, breathing hard. "It's not sustainable. The men are already exhausted." "What's our position?" Worsley pulled out his sextant and calculated quickly. 74 degrees south, 36 degrees west. Nearest land is Paulet Island, 340 miles northeast. But South Georgia Island, 900 miles, Grant finished. But South Georgia is the only place with ships that can mount a rescue. Paulet Island is abandoned. "Captain, we're not moving north. The ice is drifting, carrying us with it. I've been taking readings every 4 hours. We're moving southwest, away from everything. Grant had suspected as much. They could exhaust themselves dragging boats and still end up farther from safety than when they started. How long until the ice breaks up enough to launch the boats? Could be weeks, could be months. The pack doesn't break up until spring, and we're heading into winter now. Below them, the crew prepared to harness up again. Grant watched James adjust his harness, wincing as rope pressed against torn shoulders. The kid was 19. He lied about his age to get on this expedition, dreaming of adventure. Now he was bleeding and exhausted, trapped 900 miles from home with winter closing in. Grant climbed down. 5 more hauls today, he announced. Then we make camp. We're pacing ourselves for the long run, not a sprint. The men nodded, too tired to speak. They leaned into their harnesses. The ropes went taut, and inch by terrible inch, they dragged their survival north through ice that was carrying them south. 17 days of dragging boats broke something in the crew. Not their bodies, though those were wrecked. Shoulders rubbed raw, hands swollen and infected, feet developing frostbite. What broke was their faith that movement meant progress. Grant called a halt on the 18th day when Worsley showed him the navigation readings. They'd covered 12 miles in 17 days. The ice had drifted them 23 miles southwest. Net result, they were 11 miles farther from safety than when the Resolute sank. The crew gathered in evening camp, 3 tents arranged around a blubber stove. 27 men packed into spaces designed for 18. The smell was brutal. Unwashed bodies, seal meat, wet wool. But the tents trapped heat, and in Antarctica, heat meant survival. Grant stood in the center tent with Crean, Worsley, McNeish, and Dr. Macklin. Maps spread between them showed the reality they all understood, but hadn't spoken aloud. We stopped dragging the boats, Grant said. We're expending calories faster than we can replace them, and we're moving backward anyway. McNeish nodded. So we wait for the ice to break up. We wait. We hunt seals for food and blubber. We conserve strength, and we let the ice carry us where it's going. Grant traced a line on the map. The currents in the Weddell Sea move in a gyre, a circle. Eventually, the ice will drift far enough north to start breaking up. When that happens, we launch the boats. How long? Worsley asked. Months, maybe 4 or 5 before we're far enough north for spring thaw to open leads we can navigate. Silence settled over the tent. 4 or 5 months trapped on drifting ice with winter coming. Temperatures that would drop to 70 below. Storms that could shred their tents. And the constant threat of ice breaking apart beneath them. The men won't take it well, Crean said. They believed we were making progress. Now you're telling them we wasted 17 days. I'm telling them the truth, Grant replied. Which is that sometimes survival means accepting you can't force nature to cooperate. We adapt to what the ice does, or we die fighting it uselessly. Dr. Macklin spoke up. Several men are developing frostbite. Morrison's right foot is bad. The physical toll of hauling boats was manageable short-term. Long-term, we'd have men losing toes, fingers, possibly worse. I'll tell them tonight, after they've eaten. Grant looked at each man. I'm open to better ideas. Anyone have one? No one spoke. We're calling this place Patience Camp, Grant announced. We'll hunt. We'll maintain equipment. We'll keep watch rotations, and we'll wait for the ice to give us an opening. He stepped outside into Antarctic night. The sun had finally set after months of continuous daylight. Winter was here. Above him, the southern stars blazed with impossible clarity, beautiful and indifferent. The ice didn't care if they lived or died. Only Grant cared, and his care had to be enough for 27 men. The ice broke beneath them on the 93rd day. Grant woke to sharp cracks echoing across the frozen wasteland. He was out of his tent in seconds, grabbing men as he went. Everyone up! The flow's breaking! Move! The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Men stumbled from tents, grabbing supplies. The ice shuddered with each new crack. Grant could see fracture lines spreading like lightning, dark water welling up through gaps. Boats! Crean was already at the James Caird, cutting ropes. Get the boats to stable ice. Grant scanned the flow. They'd been living on a section roughly 200 yards across. Now it was fragmenting into dozens of smaller pieces. he spotted a larger section, 50 yards east, still solid. "There," he pointed. "Move everything to that section. Boats first, then supplies, then personnel." The James Caird went first, 10 men hauling it across questionable ice. Behind them, the ice they just crossed split apart, creating a gap of black water. "Faster!" Grant shouted. The other boats followed. Supply crates came next, men forming human chains. Grant counted heads as men crossed. 18, 20, 23. A crack opened beneath Morrison. He went down with a yell, breaking through into water cold enough to kill in minutes. Crean dove flat, grabbing Morrison's coat as the man flailed. "Pull!" Crean roared. 3 men grabbed Crean's legs and hauled backward. Morrison came up gasping and shaking. They dragged him from the crack and stripped off his wet clothes, wrapping him in every dry blanket they had. "Get him in a tent." Dr. Macklin was already checking for hypothermia. "Keep him warm and get hot food into him." Grant counted again. 27. Everyone accounted for. He looked back at their camp. 3 months of routine. The tents still stood on ice, now separated from them by 30 feet of open water. As he watched, one tent slid into the water and disappeared. "Forget the tents," Grant ordered. "We've got the boats, supplies, and all the men." "Captain," Worsley appeared with his sextant. "I got a reading before chaos started. We've drifted to 70 degrees south. The pack's breaking up because we're finally far enough north. This is what we've been waiting for." Grant looked at the water opening around them. Leads were forming, channels between ice flows. After 3 months of waiting, the ice was finally releasing its grip. But night was falling, temperature dropping to 50 below. They had no tents and Morrison was hypothermic. "We launch at first light," Grant said. "Get the boats ready. Everyone stays in the boats for shelter. It's the only protection we have now." 27 men, 3 boats, 800 miles of the most dangerous ocean on Earth. The waiting was over. That night, 27 men huddled in 3 boats pulled onto the ice. No tents, no stove. Just the boats turned on their sides as windbreaks and every blanket they owned piled on top of shivering bodies. Morrison lay in the middle of the James Caird, wrapped like a cocoon. His skin had gone gray. His breathing came shallow and quick. Dr. Macklin stayed beside him, checking his pulse every 10 minutes. "How is he?" Grant asked. "Alive. Barely. If his core temperature drops any lower, his heart will stop." Macklin looked up, his face haggard in the darkness. "We need to get him warm, Captain. Really warm. Not just preventing him from freezing, actually raising his temperature." "With what?" "We've got no fuel for a fire. The blubber stove went down with the tents." "Body heat. Pack men around him. Skin-to-skin contact if necessary." Grant turned to the crew crammed into the boat. "James, Wilson, get in close to Morrison. Take off your outer layers and press against him. Your body heat might be the only thing keeping him alive tonight." The 2 men didn't hesitate. They stripped down to undershirts and flanked Morrison, wrapping their arms around him. Within minutes, all 3 were shivering violently, but Morrison's breathing began to even out. Grant checked his watch. 4 hours until first light. 4 hours to keep 27 men alive in 50 below temperatures with no shelter. He looked at the other 2 boats where men pressed together for warmth, their breath creating clouds of frozen vapor. This was just the first night. They still had 800 miles to go. This story takes time to tell right. If you're invested, subscribe to the channel. It means everything. Now back to the ice. They launched the boats at dawn into water so cold it smoked. Grant counted heads one final time. 9 men in the James Caird with him and Worsley. 9 in the Dudley Docker under Crean's command. 9 in the Stancomb Wills led by Hudson. 27 souls in 3 wooden boats, now facing the Drake Passage. 800 miles of the most violent ocean on the planet. The first hour went smoothly. Men rowed in coordinated strokes, following leads between ice flows. Worsley navigated from the bow, calling out directions. Temperature hovered around 20 below, but the exertion of rowing kept the men warm enough to function. Then the weather turned. Grant saw it coming, a dark line on the southern horizon that grew rapidly into a wall of gray cloud. The wind hit first, gusting to 30 knots and turning flat water into choppy swells. Then came the snow, thick and blinding, reducing visibility to 20 feet. "Close up!" Grant shouted to the other boats. "Stay within sight!" The swells built quickly. 3 feet became 6. 6 became 10. The boats rode up wave faces and crashed down into troughs, shipping water with every descent. Men grabbed buckets and bailers, working frantically to keep ahead of the intake. "Bail!" Grant roared over the wind. "If we swamp, we die in minutes." Young James bailed beside him, his face pale but determined. Water sloshed around their feet, icy and threatening. Grant could feel his boots filling, the cold seeping through wool socks. Frostbite was coming. A wave larger than the rest rose ahead. 20 feet, maybe more. The James Caird climbed the face, almost vertical, men grabbing anything they could hold. At the crest, Grant looked down into a valley of black water. They plunged. The impact sent water exploding over the bow, drenching everyone aboard. "Bail! Bail! Bail!" Men worked like machines, scooping water and throwing it overboard. But more water came with each wave. The boat was riding heavier, sitting lower. Grant looked for the other boats. The Dudley Docker was visible 50 yards away, also bailing frantically. The Stancomb Wills had disappeared into the snow and spray. "Where's the third boat?" Worsley shouted. Grant's heart clenched. "Hudson!" He bellowed into the wind, knowing it was useless. Another massive wave rolled toward them. Grant gripped the gunwale and prepared for impact. The wave broke over them, solid green water that filled the boat to the thwarts. For a moment, the James Caird wallowed, more submerged than afloat. "We're going under!" Someone screamed. "Bail!" Grant commanded. "We're not dead yet!" The men bailed with desperate speed. Slowly, painfully, the boat rose. They were still afloat, still alive. But the Stancomb Wills was still missing, and the storm was getting worse. The storm blew itself out after 16 hours. When the wind finally dropped and the snow cleared, Grant's hands were frozen into claws around his bailer. He couldn't straighten his fingers. "There!" Worsley pointed northeast. The Dudley Docker appeared through the fog, still afloat. Grant counted heads. All 9 men accounted for, but the Stancomb Wills was nowhere. Grant scanned the horizon. Ice floes, open water, more ice. No boat. 9 men gone. Hudson, Morrison, 3 scientists, 4 sailors. All dead because he'd lost them in a storm. "Captain," James pointed southeast, "is that—" A dark shape bobbed between ice floes, maybe half a mile away. Grant grabbed the oars. "Row! Everyone who can still move, row!" They closed the distance in 20 minutes. The Stancomb Wills sat low in the water, every man aboard bailing, but they were alive, all 9 of them. Hudson looked up as the James Caird came alongside. "Thought you'd abandoned us, Captain." "Not a chance." Grant assessed their situation. The Stancomb Wills had a crack running along the starboard side. Water leaked through faster than the men could bail. "How long have you been leaking?" 6 hours, we're losing ground. Another few hours and we'll swamp." Grant made the calculation. They couldn't repair the boat at sea. They needed land or stable ice and time to work. "We redistribute. McNeish, get your tools. We're putting extra men in the Caird and the Docker while you patch that hull." They pulled the boats together, lashing them side by side. 5 men from the Stancomb Wills transferred to the other boats. That left 4 men to work on repairs. McNeish examined the crack. "I can plug it with canvas and seal it with blubber fat. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold. Give me 3 hours." "You've got 2, Grant said. The carpenter worked while the rest ate their first food in 20 hours. Seal meat, frozen solid, that they gnawed like dogs with bones. Grant forced down his share. The meat tasted like fish oil and rubber, but it was calories. Worsley took a star sight with his sextant. He calculated their position, then frowned. "Captain, we've drifted 60 miles northeast. The storm pushed us in the right direction. How far to land? If we're aiming for Elephant Island, maybe 250 miles. 5 days if weather holds and we row 12 hours a day." 5 days, Grant looked at his crew. Exhausted, frostbitten, soaked through. Morrison was conscious but barely responsive. 2 others showed signs of hypothermia. but it was the only option they had. "McNeish," Grant called. "How much longer?" 30 minutes. "Make it 20. Grant stood. "We row for Elephant Island. 12-hour shifts, 6 hours rest. We stay together no matter what. We started with 27 men. We're reaching land with 27 men. Clear." Exhausted nods and mumbled acknowledgments. Grant sat back down, his body screaming for rest. But rest meant freezing, and freezing meant death. So he picked up his oar and waited for McNeish to finish. 250 miles to go. On the fourth day, James stopped talking. He'd been rowing mechanically for hours when Grant noticed the silence. The kid always talked about home, his family, what he'd do when rescued. Now he just rowed with blank eyes. Grant moved beside him. "James, look at me." No response. The kid's eyes stayed unfocused. His hands gripped the oar with white knuckles, but the rowing had become automatic, mindless. "Dr. Macklin," Grant called. "I need you." The doctor examined James quickly. "Hypothermia. Advanced stage. His core temperature is dropping. Another few hours and his organs will start shutting down." "What do we need?" "Heat, real heat, and warm food if possible." Grant looked around. No stove, no way to make fire. The seal meat was frozen solid, and the temperature was dropping, down to 30 below. "We stop for the night," Grant announced. "Find an ice floe large enough to hold all 3 boats." Worsley looked at him sharply. "Captain, we're making good time. We'll have dead men by morning." Grant pointed at James. "Look at them." Worsley scanned the other boats. In the Dudley Docker, 2 men had slumped over their oars. In the Stancomb Wills, Morrison lay in the bottom, wrapped in blankets but shivering violently. The crew was breaking down. They found a floe an hour later. The men pulled the boats onto the ice, then collapsed. Grant had to shake some awake to get them moving. "Tents," he ordered. "Use the boat canvas. Rig shelters." McNeish and Crean worked together, rigging canvas as lean-tos against the overturned boats. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind. Grant focused on James. The kid's shivering had stopped. The worst sign. When the body stopped shivering, it meant it had given up trying to generate heat. "Strip him down," Grant ordered Macklin. "Get the wet clothes off. Then I want 4 men around him. Body heat transfer." They removed James's frozen outer layers and wrapped him in dry blankets. 4 men, including Crean and Grant, pressed close, sharing body heat. James's skin felt like ice. "Come on, kid," Grant muttered. "Stay with us." For 20 minutes, nothing changed. Then slowly, James's chest began rising and falling more steadily. His eyelids fluttered. "Captain?" James's voice came out as a croak. "Right here." "Are we dead?" "Not yet, and not planning to be." They stayed on that floe for 12 hours. When dawn broke, Grant took stock. 27 men still alive, 3 boats still seaworthy, and according to Worsley, maybe 60 miles left to Elephant Island. 2 more days. If they could survive 2 more days, they'd reach land. Grant woke every man at dawn. No one wanted to move. Bodies had stiffened overnight, muscles locked from cold and exhaustion. Getting the men into the boats took an hour. Men had to be lifted. Some couldn't grip the oars anymore. "How many can still row?" Grant asked Crean. Crean did a count across all 3 boats. "Maybe 15. The rest are passengers now. Dead weight." Dead weight they couldn't afford. Every man who couldn't row meant the others had to work harder. But Grant couldn't blame them. They'd been rowing for 4 days straight in sub-zero temperatures with minimal food and no rest. The human body had limits, and his crew had exceeded them. The ones who can row rotate every hour, Grant decided. Shorter shifts, more rest between. "We're not racing anymore. We're just trying to stay alive long enough to reach land." They pushed off the ice floe at 8 in the morning. The water was calmer today. No storm, just steady swells that rocked the boats but didn't threaten to capsize them. Grant took that as a small mercy. They needed 1 day without crisis. By noon, Worsley spotted birds, petrels circling in the distance, which meant land was close, maybe 20 miles, maybe less. The men who were still conscious perked up at the news. Land meant solid ground. It meant stopping. It meant they might actually survive this. "There," James pointed with a hand wrapped in bloody bandages. Is that rocks? Grant strained his eyes. Yes. Black rocks jutting from white ice. Elephant Island. Barren, uninhabited, nothing but rock and penguin colonies. But it was land. After 4 months on ice floes and 5 days in open boats, it was the most beautiful thing Grant had ever seen. They landed on Elephant Island on April 14, 1917, 149 days after the Resolute sank. The boats rode surf through jagged rocks before finding a small stretch of pebble beach. When the James Caird's bow scraped solid ground, several men fell to their knees and kissed the rocks. Grant couldn't blame them. It was the first land they'd touched in 497 days. But the celebration lasted maybe 30 seconds. Grant surveyed their situation with cold calculation. Elephant Island was uninhabited. No whaling stations, no rescue ships, no settlements, just barren rock, ice, and penguin colonies. They had food for maybe 3 weeks if they rationed carefully. After that, they'd be hunting penguins and seals. Get the men off the boats, Grant ordered Crean. Check for injuries. Full medical assessment within the hour. Dr. Macklin moved among the crew, examining each man. The results weren't good. All 27 men showed frostbite, some minor, some severe. Morrison had lost feeling in 3 toes. 2 others couldn't feel their fingers. James's hands were so swollen the skin had split open. Everyone was malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from exposure. We need shelter, Macklin reported. Real shelter, not canvas lean-tos. These men won't survive another week in the open. Grant looked at the island. Rock and ice, no trees, no building materials except 3 boats and canvas covers. McNeish, can you build something from the boats? The carpenter examined the terrain. He pointed to a flat section protected by rock outcroppings. There, we overturned 2 boats, used them as the frame. Cover with canvas. Pack snow around the edges for insulation. It won't be comfortable, but it'll block wind. How long? 2 days if everyone who can work helps. Grant gathered the crew. We're not rescued yet, he said bluntly. This island is 900 miles from the nearest whaling station. No ships come here. No rescue parties know where to look. If we wait, we die. The words settled over them like a weight. So we don't wait, Grant continued. McNeish is building shelter for 21 men. That shelter will be your home until I return, because I'm taking 5 men and the James Caird and sailing to South Georgia Island. 800 miles across the worst ocean on Earth. We'll reach the whaling station, organize rescue, and come back for you. Silence. Then Vincent, one of the scientists, spoke up. That's suicide. The James Caird is a 22-foot boat. You can't cross 800 miles of Drake Passage in that. We don't have a choice, Grant said. Stay here and we're all dead within a month. Someone has to go for help, and it has to be now, while we still have strength. Who goes with you? Crean asked. Grant had already decided. Worsley, I need the best navigator. Crean, I need someone I trust absolutely. McNeish, we'll need carpentry skills if the boat gets damaged. And 2 others. He looked at the crew. Volunteers. Every man who could stand raised his hand. Even Morrison, barely conscious, lifted his arm. He chose 2 experienced sailors, Tom McCarthy and Timothy O'Brien. The rest stay with Wild, Grant said. Build the shelter. Hunt for food. Stay alive. I'll be back within 3 months. That's a promise. Wild stepped forward. And if you don't come back, Grant met his eyes, then you figure out how to save yourselves. But I'm coming back. Every man here is going home. They spent 3 days preparing the James Caird for a journey it was never designed to make. McNeish reinforced the hull with extra planking salvaged from the Stancomb Wills. He built a makeshift deck over the open boat using canvas and wood. It wasn't waterproof, but it would keep them from swamping in heavy seas. Grant supervised loading supplies. 1 month of food, 2 barrels of fresh water, navigation equipment, medical supplies, extra clothing, sleeping bags already soaked and frozen. 6 men would live in a space 22 feet long and 6 feet wide for however long it took to cross 800 miles. On April 24th, Grant stood on the beach watching his crew finish the shelter. They'd built something that looked like a cave made from boats and canvas. It would keep them alive, barely. Young James approached, walking with a limp. "Captain, I want to come with you." Grant shook his head. "You're staying. You've earned rest." "I've earned the right to see this through to the end." James's voice was firm. "I lied about my age to get on this expedition. I've crossed 900 miles of frozen hell. I'm not stopping now." Grant studied the 19-year-old who'd grown up over 5 months. "Fine, but you follow every order exactly. No heroics. Clear." Clear. That made 7 men for a 6-man boat. Grant pulled Crean aside. "I'm taking James. That puts us at 7. Leave O'Brien. He's got frostbite worse than he's letting on. Won't last a week in open ocean." Grant found O'Brien and broke the news. The sailor took it with quiet resignation. At noon, they dragged the James Caird into the surf. The 21 men staying behind lined the beach. Grant shook hands with Wild. 3 months. Keep them alive that long." "I will. You just make sure you come back." Grant climbed into the James Caird. Worsley sat in the bow with navigation equipment. Crean took the tiller. McNeish, McCarthy, and James manned the oars. 6 men in a boat built for coastal runs, about to attempt one of the most dangerous ocean crossings on the planet. They pushed off through the surf. Grant looked back at Elephant Island. 21 men on black rocks watching them row away. If Grant failed, those men would die waiting. If he succeeded, he'd save them all. "Set course for South Georgia," Grant ordered. Worsley checked his compass. 320 degrees, 800 miles. God help us. The James Caird turned northwest into the Drake Passage. Behind them, Elephant Island disappeared. Ahead lay nothing but ocean and the promise Grant had made to bring every man home. The storm hit on day 9. A hurricane that meteorologists would later call one of the worst ever recorded in the Drake Passage. Waves reached 60 feet, wind screamed at 80 knots, and the James Caird became a toy boat in the hands of an angry ocean. Grant clung to the mast as a wave broke over the boat. Green water filled the interior. "Bail!" he roared. The men bailed, knowing their lives depended on it. Ice formed on the rigging, solid ice that accumulated with every wave, every spray. The weight threatened to capsize them. Grant and Crean took turns crawling forward with axes, chipping ice while waves tried to wash them overboard. "Captain," Worsley shouted, "the rudder's failing, wood's cracking." Grant crawled aft to where Crean fought the tiller. The rudder post had developed a split. If the rudder went completely, they'd lose all steering. The boat would broach sideways and capsize. "McNeish, get back here." The carpenter examined the crack, water pouring over him. "I can brace it, but I need someone to hold the tiller steady." Crean locked the tiller in place. McNeish worked quickly, driving wooden wedges into the crack and wrapping everything with rope and canvas. A field repair that might last minutes or might last days. A wave larger than any before rose ahead. Grant looked up at it, 70 feet high, a moving wall of black water. "Hold on!" Grant grabbed James. "Hold on and don't let go." The James Caird climbed the wave face, almost vertical. At the crest, Grant could see in every direction, nothing but waves and storm. Then they dropped. The boat fell down the wave's backside, completely airborne, before crashing into the trough with an impact that should have shattered the hull. Water exploded over them. Grant's grip on James nearly broke. When the water cleared, they were still afloat. Somehow. "Everyone answer," Grant shouted. "Sound off. Crean here. Worsley, McNeish, McCarthy, James, 6 men, all still aboard." The storm raged for 36 more hours. The men took turns at oars and tiller, working in shifts. Grant stopped sleeping. Someone had to stay alert, had to watch for the next crisis. On day 11, the storm broke. Grant took a star sight and calculated their position. They'd been blown 200 miles off course. Instead of 800 miles to South Georgia, they now faced nearly 1,000. And they had food for maybe 10 more days. But they were alive, still moving, still fighting. "Adjust course," Grant told Worsley. "We keep going. We've come too far to quit now." On day 17, they spotted land. Worsley saw it first, a dark smudge on the horizon that resolved into mountains as they drew closer. South Georgia Island. They'd made it across 800 miles of the Drake Passage in a 22-foot boat, against odds that should have killed them a dozen times over. But Grant's relief died fast when he realized where they'd landed. The south coast, the uninhabited side, sheer cliffs rising straight from the ocean. No beaches, no way to land safely, and the whaling stations were all on the north coast, on the other side of a mountain range no one had ever crossed. "We have to sail around," Worsley said, studying the coastline through salt-crusted eyes. Grant looked at his crew. 17 days in open ocean had reduced them to barely functional husks. James couldn't feel his hands anymore. McCarthy was coughing blood. McNeish had frostbite so severe his toes had turned black. They were out of food except for a handful of biscuits, out of water except for what they could melt from ice. The boat itself was falling apart, seams leaking, rudder held together by prayer and rope. "We can't," Grant said quietly. "The boat won't make it. The men won't make it. We have to go over the mountains." Crean stared at him. "Captain, those mountains are 9,000 feet high, covered in glaciers and ice fields. No one's ever crossed them. We don't have climbing equipment. We don't have food. We don't even have a map of the interior." "I know," Grant said, "but it's our only option. We land here, leave 3 men with the boat, and 3 of us cross the mountains to reach the whaling station. Then we come back with a rescue party." The decision was made. They landed in a small cove, pulled the James Caird above the tide line, and collapsed on solid ground for the first time in 17 days. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and share it. It helps the next person find their way here.